and welcome everyone to This is Recruiting, a series focused on helping tech recruiters and HR professionals around the world to find actionable insights and tips from fellow recruiters on taking tech recruiting to the next level. I'm your host, Sachin Gupta, founder at Hackerearth. At Hackerearth, we have a vision to match developers to the right opportunities all across the globe. And we do that through accurate coding assessments, remote interviews, and virtual hackathons. So let's get started with the very first episode where we have with us Michelle Yoon, who's the global HR generalist at StackOverflow. Welcome, Michelle. How are you doing?
Hi, Sachin. Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing well. A little bit about myself. As Sachin said, I am the global HR generalist at StackOverflow. My role consists of a mixture of recruiting for non-technical positions and partnerships with our HR VPs to enable managers and employees to be their best. Stack Overflow is a large community for developers, over 50 million visitors a month. We build products that empower developers, connect great people to companies that are hiring or have a product or service, and product collaboration and knowledge solutions to enable productivity, growth, and discovery.
Thanks, Michelle. It's a pleasure to have you today. Thanks a lot for taking out the time. So let's get started with the question. So I understand that Stack Overflow has been kind of semi-remote until the COVID-19 pandemic. So you obviously, and now we are all 100% remote, whether we like it or not. So obviously this situation is not unfamiliar to you. And from a company perspective, there's obviously been some sort of readiness. And there are a lot of recruiters, HR folks out there who are doing it for the first time, right? So the intent of this conversation is if we can get them some insights, some tips on how they can manage the situation, and then as we go back to work, continue doing that, that would be great. So what's your, given that remote work is going to stay and remote hiring is obviously going to be even more, I believe it's going to be there for longer. What do you think are some of the trends from a remote hiring perspective today?
Yeah, the trends in remote hiring right now is simple. Remote hiring is increasing dramatically. This is an unprecedented time when the majority of us are working from home. Companies who never had a remote culture have had to learn how to completely shift. From the perspective of a talent acquisition partner, the number of candidates who work with or as a remote employee has increased over the years, and I'm seeing, like a lot of you, more companies doing remote hiring in recent weeks.
Okay. How does your recruiting funnel look like? What are the key steps that you have in your recruiting funnel?
Yeah, I would say our process is similar across many organizations. We have our recs on our job board, ways to show the open positions to subject matter experts to appropriate niche boards as well, and a steady influx of sourced candidates to build a healthy pipeline.
Got it. What's your strategy for sourcing tech candidates? Do you focus specifically on and going forward and even in the past who are looking for remote opportunities, or are you open to any candidate? And then how do you deal with the candidates who are probably not too comfortable working remotely?
I would say, in regards of the first part on finding candidates who are working remote, I wouldn't say that there's a clear differentiator between listing who is remote or not, unless it is identified on their profile, for example, if it's on LinkedIn. Right. And besides that, as we talk about remote work, and for someone who has yet to experience it, a way to really pitch the idea is that working from home means you have more time for yourself. You can avoid a frustrating commute to work with fewer distractions and have the flexibility to live or travel anywhere in the world.
Got it. That's interesting. So for you, what are the top 3 tools that help you optimize your recruiting process?
The top 3 tools would be Fuse, Google Meet and/or Zoom, and Greenhouse. So Fuse allows me to call candidates regardless if I'm working from home or in the office. Google Meet and Zoom for video interviews and conferences between colleagues and candidates all over the world. and Greenhouse, our applicant tracking system to help us maintain a structured interview, in addition to streaming the process and submitting feedback in one place.
Got it. Doubling down a little bit on the structured process on Greenhouse, do you have a specific, how should I put it, a specific workflow that has worked well for you, either at the screening stage or at the interviewing stage? Any insights that you could give on that?
I would say having a structured interview process is very important. Starting first with having a conversation with the hiring, the gaps in a team that need to be filled, the must-haves compared to nice-to-haves. Being able to really hone in and zero in on the skills that are really required to help the team elevate in regards of what is needed is going to save the recruiter a lot of time from going back and forth with our hiring manager, where the recruiter may have already dedicated many hours into sourcing candidates.
Right. So which means you spend, even before the recruiter starts sourcing, you spend a lot of time with the hiring manager to make sure that the hiring manager and the recruiter are on the same page.
Absolutely, that is key. And I think from that point on is discussing about what is that interview process is going to look like, who's involved, what is each individual or individuals assessing for, to make sure there is no confusion in between of what that person would be speaking about, also and being able to not have any redundant questions.
Got it. And do you also spend time in kind of training the interviewing panel on the questions to be asked? Do you prescribe any set of questions, or is that something that you leave it to the hiring panel?
We actually discuss about that with the hiring manager, and any interviewer a part of this process goes through an interview training by one of our fellow talent acquisition partners to ensure that we are addressing all the best practices and making sure there's no unconscious bias and so on and so forth.
That's nice. It's quite interesting that you brought up the element of unconscious bias. I that's something that's personally close to me. And that's one of the motivations why we kind of started Hackerearth, because we saw that there were developers who were out there, maybe not from great pedigree, maybe not from a good background, but equally talented, but they wouldn't make the cut because the resume didn't kind of speak about that. So do you, from a bias perspective, are there any kind of processes or best practices that you follow at StackOverflow?
In regards of how we find quality candidates?
Oh, no, I would say, how do you ensure that there is no or little bias in the entire interviewing process, right from screening to up till interviewing?
Yeah, it's really making sure that the feedback from the interviewers are reviewed from each talent acquisition partner, which we get a notification. We're evaluating if any of the feedback has any sense of unconscious bias that is attached. And if there is, we address it, we discuss about it, and try to resolve, making sure moving forward, there are no continuation of unconscious bias feedback entered, because we want to make it in a more of an inclusive environment and making sure that we're really sticking to the facts of what is needed in the position for that person to be successful and really an impact immediately as a hire in our organization.
So that's commendable that the talent acquisition partners go through every feedback to make sure that the feedback is accurate and there's no bias. So moving on to the next question, according to you, what are the top skills a recruiter needs to have while focusing on remote hiring? And these could be skills in terms of sourcing or things that they need to keep in mind while they're talking to the candidates, anything that you feel is relevant for given the current scenario.
Yeah, I would say it's kind of similar to one of the questions I answered prior to. It's having the consistency, making sure you're organized as much as possible on a daily basis. That helps create a routine and making sure nothing's slipping through the cracks, especially as we are shifting to this remote work culture, as well as the communication, right? Everyone has to make sure that we're aligned with whatever processes and changes that we've made, also understanding the tools and systems that we have in place. you can assume everyone knows how to use one of the tools or more so, but it's always better to over communicate in this scenario where everyone is working remote.
All right. So have you, in the last 2, 3 months, have you felt that communication has become harder? Because, when you're at office, you can just walk up to the person, get them in a room and have that conversation, but now you have to schedule a meeting. And so has that resulted in any inefficiencies or delays in the process?
I would say it has been a shift because we're all shifting to having to communicate through whatever tools like Slack, email. However, in Stack Overflow, if one person is remote, everyone else is logging in through Google Meet or Zoom to keep it as a fair and balanced communication between everyone. So it hasn't been the most biggest challenge, but over communicating is something that I want to continue to remind myself, but it has improved as it is a team and org effort to have that reminder for everyone.
Makes sense. Yeah, that's a very practical tip that sometimes we forget that even if one person is remote, they could feel left out. So it's a great tip that you all join in on the video call. Interesting.
Absolutely.
So what is the biggest mistake that recruiters make when it comes to remote hiring? And if you could talk from your own experience, if you look back and you feel there's something that you could have done better, what would it be?
Yeah, I would say, speaking more so of my own experience rather than others,
Right.
this was a few years back, but one of my biggest mistakes that first come to mind was sending the wrong time for an on-site interview by 45 minutes.
Oh.
Luckily, I had a hiring manager who was available within 20 minutes, so the candidate didn't wait for an extended period of time. Upon the candidate's arrival, I explained the situation and apologized. The candidate appreciated the apology and the transparency. One thing I do want to say to all recruiters who are adjusting to the remote hiring environment is it's not the end of the world if we make a mistake. Especially as we shift to a new process, we're all learning remote first best practices on the job. We are humans, and it's all about how we pick ourselves back up and put our problem solving hat on.
All right. That's interesting. So I'm sure after that you must have been like super careful not to miss out on timing.
Yeah, and that even goes for video interviews. It happens when so many moving pieces are happening at once, but it's like I said, how you pick yourself back up. Those kind of mistakes are kind of ingrained in your mind and you
Right.
never want to make it again.
Yeah, you become doubly cautious intuitively.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
So you spoke about on-site interviews, and traditionally organizations have obviously they set up maybe 3 or 4, in certain cases even 5 or 6 on-site interviews in the same day, right? And that kind of works when the candidate is coming over to your premise. They get to meet people. There's a subtle element of selling to them by showing them the culture, the office. Now all of that cannot happen in video interviews. So have you introduced any change in the structure or the format in which you do these on-site interviews, like virtual on-site interviews? Are you still scheduling them all in the same day, or you're pacing those out? And how do you make sure, actually that's question 1, and then question 2 is, how do you make sure that the candidate still gets some feel about the organization while they cannot come in and look at the office, but how do you communicate about the culture and the team virtually?
Yeah, so the first part, I would say there haven't been too much of a shift because we actually have candidates meeting quite a few different individuals on the interview team. So roughly half the interviews may be video interviews anyway prior to this whole shift.
Okay.
And then the rest of the interviews, like the final, the senior interview would roughly be on site. I would say the only thing that really has shifted is making sure that our interview team feels comfortable that all the interviews are virtual, as well as the candidate, right? We're thinking about this as a two-way street. We want the experience, both internal and external parties, to be the best. And followed by the second question that you had asked in regards to the culture, it's really about how each interviewer is able to share about their experiences in Stack Overflow, whether it's different activities or affinity groups that they've been a part of. So that gives a little bit more of an insight about our culture, but we also have our partnership with the Muse, which really shows the inside scoop about some of the videos and testimonies of our own employees and some of the exciting things and perks that we have to offer to employees.
Interesting. So I'm kind of coming towards the end of the interview. So last three questions. What would be your advice to recruiters who want to find good quality candidates? And I know it's a very open-ended question, but any practical tips or practices that have worked for you, from your own experience?
Yeah, this would go back into having a really clear outline with the hiring manager of what exactly that they're looking for, to really fill the gap in the needs of the team. Being able to really have a clear process from the beginning, and making sure that everyone is utilizing their time to the best of their abilities, as we do know that is a critical need to hire these positions because the teams are in need of the help.
Right. So have there been instances, and I'm sure there must have been, where the hiring manager wants, stars and moons. They want like 5 or 6 or 7, 8 absolute must have skills. And you know that if you go out and start searching for a candidate, you will find eventually, but it's going to take time. So you've got both a very high expectations in terms of skill sets plus a very stringent timeline. How do you push back? How do you negotiate in such scenarios with your hiring managers?
It's really level setting expectations and having communication from the beginning. Hiring managers, of course, they're very eager to have all the checklists checked off. However, sometimes we need to discuss a little bit about the actual picture and the timeline of when we will be able to deliver the amazing hire to our organization. They're more than understanding typically.
Okay. So with that, we shift our focus on the last closing two questions, which are mostly around remote hiring. So given that there is a sense that a lot of organizations will become remote. Twitter recently announced that they don't intend their employees to come back to office through 2021. And they've taken a call right away. So that's another 18 months of working remotely. Do you think that remote first trend is going to be the new normal? Or are we going to go back to offices?
I would say, in regards of remote work, first of all, I'm all for it. Sometimes it's not for everyone, but this provides a larger pool of quality candidates from really anywhere. As companies are shifting to this 100% work environment, I think in the near future, we're already seeing many organizations extending the working from home, having more leniency to allowing employees to work remote. And the term remote friendly and first is already starting to trend right now as we speak. And that's something that's going to continue moving forward.
Okay. And the last question. So what's your favorite learning source as an HR professional? And if there's anything that you specifically focus on from a remote hiring and remote work perspective, that would be great.
Yeah, I would say my favorite learning source in remote hiring is asking our very own remote veteran employees. StackOverflow has a solid population of employees for many years. They have been sharing some of their experiences as we shift to 100% remote environment. That has been helpful to adapt our hiring process. Also reaching out to different HR communities, networking events and conferences, webinars. HR leaders need to stay united more than ever given the current circumstances.
Right. That's really insightful. So that brings to the end of our session for This is Recruiting. It was really great talking to you, Michelle. Thanks so much for your time. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I'm sure I have enjoyed speaking with you today and personally learned a lot of things. For all those of you who are listening, if you've learned something new, please like and share this video to spread the word. And don't forget to put your comments and opinions in the comments below the video. And lastly, please subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you're notified next time we launch a new episode. Thank you. See you soon. Have a great day.